India is the world's largest democracy by population. But in its parliament, fewer than 15% of MPs are women. For decades, political parties have promised to change that. Bills were introduced, debated, stalled, and allowed to die. Then in 2023, something finally changed. Parliament passed the Nari Shakti Vandan Adhiniyam law. It promised that 33% of seats in the Lok Sabha and state assemblies would be reserved for women. It was a historic step, but there was a catch. The reservation would not start immediately. It would only kick in after two things were done: a fresh census and something called delimitation. Fast forward to April 2026, the government brought a new package to Parliament to move this process forward. And that's when the fight began. I'm sure you've all seen the headlines by now. Opposition opposes women's reservation. It sounds bad. Why would anyone oppose giving women more representation in this economy? But that is not what is actually happening. What the parties were opposing was not women's reservation itself, but the way it was being pushed forward through delimitation. Now, I know delimitation sounds a bit technical, but the idea is pretty simple. It simply means redrawing India's electoral map, deciding how many seats each state gets and where constituency boundaries are drawn. Because see, delimitation is based on population. States with higher population growth stand to gain more seats. States that did better on family planning, mostly in South India, fear they could end up with a smaller share of political power. And that is not a symbolic concern. That is a major share of the national voice. The government's answer to that was, no state will lose seats, everyone will gain, and the South's share will broadly stay protected under a 50% increase model. Sounds reassuring, right? But the critics weren't convinced. See, this is not just about headline numbers. They were worried about the mechanism of it all. Because under the 2026 delimitation bill, the Commission's final orders would carry the force of law. They could not be challenged in court. And the state-level associate members helping the Commission would not even get a vote. That is a lot of power with very little room to push back. So this debate is not really anti-women versus pro-women. It's basically, why should women's reservation, which almost everyone supports in principle, be tied to delimitation, the process that decides how power is distributed across India? Because those are two very different questions. And when you bundle them together, saying yes to one also means accepting the other. If the intention is truly to empower women, this should be the real question the country should be asking. Why should women's representation have to wait on a far bigger and far more contentious political exercise? We can all agree that women's reservation deserves to be debated on its own moral and democratic strength, not bundled into a process that can change who holds power in India for years to come.